A Netflix movie on serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer draws criticism, and now a new documentary on the case is coming out. I talked to the crime reporter who broke the story years ago about the case. Welcome back to Sidebar here on Law and Crime. I'm Angenette Levy. Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer from Milwaukee, has been in the news a lot lately. You may recall that he killed 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991 when he was apprehended in Milwaukee. And the reason this case has been in the news so much lately is because a new movie came out on Netflix. It was called Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. It's been getting praise, but it's also been criticized by some for not getting the facts right. Now, a new documentary by Joel Berlinger is coming out on Netflix on Friday, October 7th. It is called Conversations with the Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes. And joining me to talk about this documentary is someone who is in it. And she actually broke the Dahmer story back in 1991 when she was working as a newspaper reporter. Her name is Ann E. Schwartz, and she has a new book coming out called Monster, the True Story of the Jeffrey Dahmer Murders. So, Ann Schwartz, welcome to Sidebar. Thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me, Angenette. Happy to have the conversation.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the movie, not the documentary, but the movie from Ryan Murphy that came out a couple of weeks ago on Netflix.
Right. Well, it's important to make the distinction between documentary and movie. Uh, I can't really quarrel with whether or not Ryan Murphy stuck to the facts because he never said he was making a documentary. He portrayed a number of things in the movie that did not actually happen in real life. That happens when people take a true story and then adapt it for film. He had a very clear mission when he was doing that movie, which was he was going to show it and portray the victims, do this all from their lens, do this from their point of view. And so it wasn't surprising to me, I suppose, that there were a lot of inaccuracies. But is there such a thing as inaccuracies on a movie? You know, he gets to take all the artistic license. I don't begrudge him the opportunity to make a movie and to have the facts represent whatever he wants them to. What I am grateful to have the opportunity to do is to talk with you and to say it's a movie. Don't watch this movie. Don't be outraged by certain situations that are portrayed specifically involving the police. Don't portray that is exactly what happened, because it did not.
And a movie is a a dramatization. They take a lot of creative license with the facts. When you make a movie based on a real life incident, we've heard this many times over the years about different things. So, talk to us a little bit about the documentary that's coming out, Joel Berlinger's documentary. He's done a number of series for Netflix about tapes that have these serial killers on them. So, talk to us about your role in the documentary.
Sure. You know, in the 30 years, actually 31 years since the Dahmer case was discovered, I've done lots and lots of interviews about the case. And it's refreshing when someone who is actually making the documentary or someone who's doing the interview really wants to make sure that they get the facts right. And from the beginning, Joe Berlinger and his producers were absolutely committed to the idea that they wanted to stick to the facts. And I shared an awful lot of my research with them. I shared material that I was using for the new version of my book that was released in October. All of those things were part of are part of the things I consider before I talk with people. And the idea that he wanted to stay true to the facts was important to me. Also, the fact that this was an opportunity, and I always take the opportunity when I can to clarify at least my position, just to give people another opinion on what happened when the two police officers returned Conarac synthesome to Jeffrey Dahmer. That's something that has been portrayed and discussed. It has been misreported. It's been misrepresented and speculated on. So I'm always grateful to talk about that piece of it. But the documentary itself is exciting. I'm glad to be part of that. I was interviewed for it. I can only speak to my part of it, which was to help with the research and to do one of the on-camera interviews. My understanding is they do have the tapes from Jeffrey Dahmer, you hear him confess to his crimes in his voice. And that is really the creepy part of this, because he's talking, I'm using more inflection than he does when he's talking about these crimes. He's a very flat individual, very vanilla, very not a lot, not a lot of personality. So that makes it eerie for me when I hear his voice. And we haven't heard a lot of his voice. He gave a statement in court, I believe court proceedings, and maybe just a couple of one-off interviews right after he went to prison are all we have of his voice. So this will be the first opportunity that a lot of people have to hear him in his voice.
And let's go back to what you just discussed, the returning of the phone by police to Jeffrey Dahmer. Talk to us about that and why you feel that's so important.
It's an important part of the case because it really was the point in that case. So I'm a young reporter covering a case of a serial killer, and I watched once that information came out about the fact that police had contact with Jeffrey Dahmer just a few months before the discovery. That completely pivoted the case toward, oh my gosh, this never had to happen because of the police. And I've always felt that that was an incorrect narrative, because one of the things that's tough is when we in 2022 use all of our sensibilities and all of our information to look back and judge how something happened in 1991. And I think that that is one of the things that makes this very challenging, is that people say that the police were homophobic and the police were racist. And when I look at what those officers had in front of them that evening, and I've done all the investigation, I've done all the interviews, I have looked at it over and over, and I have not seen an opportunity there where they would have had, where there was a red flag for them. I know that's hard for people to believe because they see these horrifying photos of what happened in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. But I was in the apartment the night of the discovery. I walked into the front door of that apartment, and there was nothing in that apartment except that it looks like maybe a single guy lives there, because it wasn't terribly orderly. But this was not some kind of a torture chamber that you would see right away. When the two officers walked into Dahmer's apartment the night of the night in May, months before the discovery, what they saw was a fairly neat apartment. They saw Conorak synthesome phones, clothes folded neatly at the corner of the couch. Jeffrey Dahmer had photographs of Conorak that were taken. They're very sexualized photographs. There were Conorak in his underwear. There were naked photos of Conorak. And we also have to remember, and this is key, that the officers weren't looking at the picture of Conorak's synthesome phone that we've seen over and over, where he looks like a little boy. He looked like a fully formed adult male. And you can see that in the photographs from the crime scene. It's just that that's not, I feel that that is not an interesting enough narrative, right, to put out there to say it wasn't the police officer's fault. And I'm perfectly willing to get yelled at and say, you're an apologist for the police. But I believe that that's a situation that incident deserves a little more examination.
And that victim, he was outside, if I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was outside naked. He didn't speak English. So there was this language barrier, and Dahmer said, oh, he's my boyfriend, or something to that effect. And, that's kind of what happened, right?
Correct. And I interviewed not just the officers, but I also interviewed the ambulance crew that was there that night, that had put the blanket around Conorak when they got him to sit down. There was nothing that indicated that he was afraid. He was sitting down. Now, look, do we know why he was like that now? Of course we do. We know exactly. We know that this was he was already in the process of being murdered. He was anesthetized by Jeffrey Dahmer. He was drugged, and and there was a hole drilled in his head. I mean, these things had already happened. So, but this is not, and again, and people say, so how did the people that were there not see that? and I don't want to be so graphic about it. There's certainly opportunities for people to be able to read about why that is if they would like to. But I can tell you that Jeffrey Dahmer walks up. Conorak doesn't seem to want to run away. He can't communicate because he is drugged, which Jeffrey Dahmer explains to the police. He was drunk and said, "This is my boyfriend, Jim. He doesn't speak a lot of English." And then the cops said, "Look, they went the extra step. Can we come up to the apartment with you? We want to make sure everything is okay." So they did. They went up to that apartment. Conorak does not try to run away when he's being walked back up to that apartment. Probably because he's essentially, he's dying. He's dying. The story is awful. The story is awful, and very sadly, it fits into a narrative now that that works for people that say the police were incompetent in some way. And as you and I were talking, have talked about, previously, that we know that law enforcement doesn't always get it right. Name a dozen cases, right? They don't always get it right. But in this case, did they get it wrong? Yeah, we know they did. But to who, who's the fault? Where's the fault there? Was there craven disregard for this child? Or did they go through all of the motions and the tragedy still occurred?
Well, and just briefly, tell us about your book.
Sure. The book is Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders. Back in 1991, I wrote the first edition of it, which is essentially a first-person account of what it was like to cover the case, to be in the apartment that night, to talk with all of the different witnesses and cops involved in the case. I was contacted last year for the 30-year, I hate to say anniversary when we're talking about crime, but for the 30-year marking of the discovery. And I went back 30 years and looked for all the principles from the case. The prosecutor, the defense attorney, talked about what happened to Dahmer in prison where he was murdered. So it's not just a here's what happened during the case, but it's also a where are they now? What happened to all those principles of the case, and what are they doing now? And how have all of us, including me, lived with the memories of that case?
Well, Ann E. Schwartz, we are looking forward to watching the documentary on Netflix, and taking a look at your book as well. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate the time, Angenette. Thank you so much, and great podcast. I love to listen to you guys. Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of Law and Crime Sidebar podcast. It is produced by Sam Goldberg, Logan Harris, and Michael Deininger. Bobby Szoke is our YouTube manager. Alyssa Fisher handles our bookings, and Kiara Bronson does our social media. You can listen to and download Sidebar on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can watch it on Law and Crime's YouTube channel. I'm Angenette Levy, and we will see you next time.